We've all been told the same story since we were kids. It's the standard script for the American dream. You go to school, you get a good job, and then you spend the next 40 years of your life on the grind. You wake up at 6 a.m. to the sound of a buzzing alarm you've grown to hate. You sit in soul-crushing traffic. You tolerate a boss who barely knows your name, and you dutifully shovel 20% of every single paycheck into a 401k. Why? Because you're told that one day, when you're 65 years old, tired, and your knees don't work like they used to, you'll finally be allowed to stop. You finally get to enjoy your life when you're almost too old to do anything with it. It's a slow, painful path that, quite frankly, sucks. It feels like you're trading your youth and your best energy for a decade of quiet relaxation at the finish line. But what if I told you there was a mathematical cheat code? What if there was a specific number, a specific dollar amount that you could hit in your 30s, and once you hit it, you never had to save another penny for retirement again? I'm not talking about quitting your job tomorrow. I'm talking about the freedom to stop saving. Imagine having your entire paycheck to actually live your life right now. No more worrying about the 20% contribution. No more depriving yourself of experiences today for a maybe tomorrow. Your future is already bought and paid for. It's just cooking in the background. This isn't some get-rich-quick fantasy. It's a financial concept called Coast Fire. And if you don't know your number, you're probably working a lot harder and stressing a lot more than you actually need to.
My name is Bill, and I'm obsessed with finding the fastest, most efficient ways to buy back our freedom. Most financial advice is based on deprivation. It's about saying no to that latte today so you can have a slightly better view from a nursing home in 40 years. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of that narrative. I want the shortcut. I want the math that lets me breathe today. That's exactly what Coast Fire represents. It is the Goldilocks zone of personal finance. You've probably heard of the hardcore FIRE movement, financial independence retire early, where people eat rice and beans, save 70% of their income, and retire at 30. That's great for some, but for most of us it sounds pretty miserable. Coast Fire is different. It's about front-loading the effort so you can coast the rest of the way. Think of it like building a massive snowman. The hardest part is right at the beginning. You're down on your knees, packing together this tiny little snowball. You're pushing it through deep, heavy snow. You're sweating, your back hurts, and the snowball is barely getting bigger. This is the stage most of us are in during our 20s and early 30s. You're grinding, saving that first $10,000 or $50,000, and it feels like it's going nowhere because your money isn't really making money yet. But if you keep pushing, eventually that snowball gets massive. It gets so heavy and has so much mass that you reach the top of a giant hill, and then you just let go. You stop pushing. Gravity takes over, and the snowball starts rolling down the other side all by itself, getting bigger and faster exponentially without you ever having to touch it again. That moment you let go, that is your Coast Fire number. It's the point where you've saved just enough money early enough that compound interest will finish the job for you. By the time you hit 65, that snowball has become an avalanche of wealth, and you didn't have to break a sweat for the last 30 years of the journey. This changes the entire psychological landscape of your life because you're no longer running a marathon with no end in sight. You're sprinting to a specific marker so you can walk the rest of the way in the sun. Let's look at the math, because when you actually see these figures side by side, it changes the way you look at every dollar you earn. To understand why Coast Fire is such a powerhouse, we have to compare two different lifestyles, Grinding Gary and Coasting Carl. Both of these guys want the exact same thing, to retire at age 65 with a comfortable nest egg of about $1.7 million. Grinding Gary follows the traditional, safe advice. He starts at age 25 and consistently puts away $500 every single month. He does this for 40 years straight without fail. By the time he hits 65, assuming an 8% average market return, he reaches his goal of $1.7 million. It's a success story by conventional standards. But think about the cost.
Gary had to sacrifice $500 of his disposable income every single month of his entire adult life. Whether he was 25 and wanted to travel, or 45 and had kids in sports, that $500 was always spoken for. He never got to feel the full weight of his paycheck.
Now look at coasting Carl. Carl decides to be intense for just 1 decade. From age 25 to 35, he lives frugally, works the side hustles, and aggressively pours money into his investments. By the time he turns 35, he has managed to squirrel away $250,000. On his 35th birthday, Carl hits his coast number. He decides he is done. He never puts another dime into a retirement account for the rest of his life. He takes that $500, and probably more, since his career has likely progressed, and he spends it. He buys the nicer car, he takes the family on the big vacations, and he lives a life of total current abundance. What happens to that $250,000 sitting in his account? He just lets it sit there, untouched, for 30 years. At that same 8% growth rate, by the time Carl turns 65, his account has ballooned into roughly $2.5 million. Think about that. Carl ends up with significantly more money than Gary, even though Carl stopped saving 3 decades earlier. Carl front-loaded the pain. He understood that $1 invested at 25 is worth 10 times more than $1 invested at 45. He let compound interest do the heavy lifting during those crucial middle decades of his life, while Gary was still pushing the snowball uphill. This isn't just a math hack. The psychology of this is where your life actually changes. Right now, most of you probably feel a constant nagging financial pressure. You might make $5,000 a month, but in the back of your mind, you know you should be saving $1,000 for the future. So mentally, you only have $4,000. There's this background anxiety that you aren't doing enough, that you're falling behind, that you'll be a burden when you're old. When you hit your Coast Fire number, that anxiety vanishes instantly. If your number is $250,000 and your portfolio hits that mark, you unlock a level of psychological freedom that most people won't feel until they're 65. Suddenly, you don't need that high-stress corporate job that pays $120,000 a year but makes you miserable. Why were you staying there? To fund a retirement that is now already funded. You could quit tomorrow and take a fun job that pays $70,000. You take a pay cut on paper, but your daily lifestyle might actually improve because you're keeping 100% of your check. You stop being in accumulation mode and switch to maintenance mode. As long as you can cover your rent and your groceries, your future is already a done deal. That is the moment you stop being a servant to your future self and start being the master of your present life. It's about removing the biggest stressor of adulthood, the fear of being broke when you're old, decades before you actually get there. So, you're probably wondering, Bill, this sounds incredible, but how do I actually find my number? It's a simple 2-step process that requires you to work backward from the future to the present. You have to start with the end goal. Step 1 is determining your full FIRE number. This is the total amount of money you need to have in the bank at age 65 to live comfortably for the rest of your life. A solid rule of thumb here is the rule of 25. You take the amount of money you want to spend annually in retirement and multiply it by 25. Let's say you want a lifestyle that costs $80,000 a year. Multiply that by 25, and your target is $2 million. That is the finish line at age 65. Step 2 is where the magic happens, the reverse calculation. You need to figure out how much you need to have invested today so that it grows into that $2 million by age 65 without you ever adding another cent. To do this, you need a compound interest calculator and a conservative estimate for market growth. Let's say you are 30 years old right now, which gives you 35 years until you hit 65. We'll use a conservative 7% annual return. Why 7%? Because the S&P 500 historically returns about 10%, but we subtract 3% for inflation. Using 7% gives us the value in today's dollars, which is much easier for our brains to wrap around. When you plug those numbers in, starting age 30, ending age 65, 7% growth,
The math tells us you need roughly $190,000. That is your Coast Fire number. If you are 30 years old and you have $190,000 sitting in low-cost index funds, you are theoretically done. You have won the retirement game. You can stop the 401k contributions, stop the aggressive saving, and start using your income to buy back your time or upgrade your current life. If you aren't at $190,000 yet, that's okay. That number becomes your singular burning focus. Forget about a balanced budget where you try to do everything at once. You need to attack that number with everything you've got. You want to hit that finish line as fast as possible, because once you cross it, the entire second half of your life gets significantly easier. Now, I can already hear the skeptics in the comments. Bill, what about a market crash? What about hyperinflation? These are valid concerns, but they shouldn't paralyze you. Inflation is exactly why we use a real return rate of 7% instead of 10%. We've already built a buffer for rising costs into the math. And as for market crashes, they are a certainty. The market will go down, it will go sideways, and it will feel scary. But over any 30-year period in history, the market has always recovered and reached new highs. We aren't day trading here. We are playing the longest game possible. Coast Fire isn't a promise that you'll never have to work again starting tomorrow. That's regular fire. Coast Fire is a strategy to remove the heaviest burden of adulthood, the existential dread of being 70 years old and unable to afford a place to live.
The bottom line is that most people are running a marathon with no finish line in sight. They're just running until they eventually collapse from exhaustion, hoping they've done enough. Coast Fire gives you a definitive finish line for the most stressful phase of your financial life. It allows you to front-load the sacrifice while you're young, energetic, and perhaps have fewer responsibilities, so you can actually enjoy the messy middle of your life. You get to enjoy your 30s, 40s, and 50s, your prime years, instead of waiting until you're 65 to start living. Figure out your number. Write it down on a Post-it note, stick it to your computer monitor, and let it be the North Star for your financial decisions. Once you hit it, the weight that lifts off your shoulders is worth every bit of the yearly grind. If this perspective shifted something for you, do me a favor and hit that like button so the algorithm can rescue more people from the 40-year grind. Subscribe if you're ready to stop playing by the old rules and start hacking the system for your own freedom. Thanks for hanging out, and happy coasting.